The series is the Ambitious Science Teaching Practices. This is the second in that series. Today, we're going to introduce the Ambitious Science Teaching Practices. And we're going to focus on Ambitious Science Teaching Practice number 2, which is eliciting student ideas. So let's start off with, how are you feeling today? So please look at the Lego heads there, and don't press yet, but we're going to ask you to decide which Lego head is representing your feeling this morning. And then we're going to do a chat avalanche. So type it into the chat, but don't hit enter yet. I'll give you a minute to connect with your feelings and to put that into a number in the chat. And then I'll give a countdown. All right, and we'll press enter in 3, 2, 1. All right, we've got a lot of ones. Great, that's wonderful for a Saturday morning. And some 2s, yes. All right. 4s. All right. Well, this is once again, this is not an easy year, and we appreciate the time and energy that you've taken to attend the PD this morning and to be here with us, to engage in thinking as a leader and how you're going to be leading science at your school. We really appreciate that. And today we hope to provide you with some tools to help do that even better. So the outcomes for today are engaged participants will learn about the ambitious science teaching practices. They're going to make instructional decisions by eliciting all students' thinking and understanding about scientific ideas. And you'll be able to facilitate making a public record of student thinking and ideas. So we ask today that you observe the online norms, which are that you remain muted until we're having a discussion, and then please jump into the discussion. If possible, leave your camera on. That's because we want to help develop a community. We're a small group, and it's just easier to connect with people when you can see them. And then we're going to be engaging in discussions. So when prompted, please make sure to engage in the discussion, either through chat or verbal. And from time to time, we will be calling on people as well. So we've got this PD in 2 parts. So what we're providing for you today, and let me just go back to the actual beginning slide because I didn't mention this. So you're going to be getting this slide deck, and really what we've got here is we've got two PDs that we're presenting to you today. The first PD is the Intro to Ambitious Science Teaching Practices, and it's a smaller PD. I was saying that it should take you about 30 minutes, but I think maybe it's going to take about 40 minutes. Is that right, Erica and Inya? Yeah, okay. And then the second PD is eliciting student ideas. So these are PDs that you can present to your staff. And the second PD is about an hour. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. The sign-in sheet is in the chat, and there's also a link to this deck that we're presenting today. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin then with that first PD, which is the Introduction to the Ambitious Science Teaching Practices. So when you have this PD deck, then you can break it into the 2, and you can present the 1, and then you can present the second one. All right. So the outcomes for this one is this is to learn about the ambitious science teaching practices. Sometimes we might slip into the acronyms, and we might call it ASTPs, or we might call them the teacher moves, because these are the teacher moves that support the student moves, and the student moves are the science and the engineering practices. Also, as we go through this PD, then we today are going to be wearing two hats. We're going to be fulfilling two roles. The two roles are the role of facilitator and the role of learner. So sometimes when the slides are white, then those will be when you're in the role as a learner. And when the slides are lavender, then that's going to be when you're in the role of a facilitator. So with that, I will pass it off.
All right, everyone. We have a couple of photos for you to look at. This is of the town of Moncton in Washington State back in 1915. And although this occurred over 100 years ago, it's still a phenomenon that's talked about in the town because it was very historic. What do you notice and what do you wonder? And what scientific reasoning can you use to support an explanation for what happened? Please prepare your thoughts in the chat. What do you notice? What do you wonder? And please share in 3, 2, 1. Ms. Aya says there was a lot of rain, which caused flooding. What happened to all the people? So Ms. King is wondering if it's as well if it's flooding. What caused the flooding? Could deforestation have anything to do with it? All right. Thank you for taking a moment to engage in this little practice of noticing and wondering, often what we ask our students to do as well, right? We're going to bring back this example in just a moment so that you can tie in your own experience of noticing and wondering to what we would ask students to do in a typical unit. Next slide, please. So let's ground our work in what we're doing in our local district at large. So for LD East this year, we have 3 instructional foci, and they are all centered around amplifying student voice, putting students at the center. So just to recall that we have 3 foci, and today we're engaging in all 3 of them because we're reviewing standards, all 3-dimensional standards of NGSS in our instruction. And we're looking at teacher practices to build our precision of pedagogy. And because you as leaders will be taking this learning back to your colleagues, we're also engaging in shifting practice to capacity building. So with student voice at the center, we have a question for you to think about for your own classroom. What does student voice look like, sound like, and feel like in science learning? Meaning, what would you see? What would you hear? What would people be feeling in that community? And please prepare your chat. You can also, of course, unmute and share your thoughts as well. So please share, what does student voice look like, sound like, and feel like in science learning? Jennifer says it sounds busy. Sharing observations, discussing findings. Curious. We might hear content vocabulary. Students critiquing each other. Making discoveries through conversation. Engagement. Thank you. So let's keep this in mind because this is what we would like to see, hear, and feel. This is what we want students to be doing, right? So how do we facilitate that as teachers? This is what our work is focused on today. Next slide. So to do that, we have two big shifts in our NGSS aligned instruction. So in science, we want to make sure that we develop and facilitate units that are phenomena centered, giving students a chance to make sense of something or develop solutions to a problem. And the way they do that is by engaging in practice-centered tasks that we intentionally select at grade level so that students can construct their knowledge and understanding. And this is what a typical unit might look like. So at the beginning, which is down in the bottom left of the screen for us, we would introduce an anchoring phenomenon, much like the one we just looked at in the town of Moncton in 1915. We would ask our students to offer initial models or explanations. And this means even before engaging in sense-making activities right away, because we want to know what they think before we start. And we want to use what they reveal as assets or partial understandings to build on throughout a unit. So we really want to give students a chance. To build their understanding throughout a unit and change their thinking. And that's why these orange bubbles, they represent the sense-making activities that we would invite our students to engage in. And of course, as they build their knowledge, we'd invite them to give revisions in the middle and end of a unit, and finally reach an evidence-based causal explanation for the phenomenon. So in summary, this is a quick review of NGSS, right? NGSS instruction means we look at the standards that we want our students to learn. Those are the content standards, or the DCI. There they are. What are students trying to figure out? And then we design and facilitate sense-making activities or tasks. And this is where the students get to do science to figure out the content. So that science and engineering practices are what the students do to figure it out. And all the while, we want to encourage them to think like scientists. We want to develop the ways that they critically think about science with the cross-cutting concepts. And all of this is grounded in a motivating purpose, which is that anchoring phenomena and storylines, giving students a reason to figure something out. This is a summary of science instruction. So then across grade levels, K through 5, what's similar? It's the science and engineering practices. And this is why in local district East, we're focusing on practice-centered instruction. So take a moment to look at those 8 SEPs, the ways that students make sense of phenomena. And then next slide, please. Of those 8, these are the student moves. Of those 8, in local district East, we're working to really develop 3 of them. Those are SEP2, developing and using models, SEP6, constructing explanations and design solutions, and SEP7, engaging in argumentation from evidence. The great thing is that these 3 work really well together to develop students' procedures for claim, evidence, and reasoning. And this is what the students do. What do we do as teachers? That's the right side. And that's the new learning that we're going to be engaging in today. Teacher moves in science center around what we do to facilitate students doing the SEPs. And those are the 4 practices you see here. These are the ambitious science teaching practices. And here I'm going to hand it off to Erica to introduce us to these practices.
So these ambitious science teaching practices, something you'll hear us call the ASTs or ASTPs, are, as Inyo mentioned, the teacher moves. So we want to think about what kinds of talk, tasks, and tools do students need in order to fully engage in meaningful forms of science learning. So today we're going to be looking at these 4 just as an overview. These are articulated by Mark Winchittle and others in his book, Ambitious Science Teaching. And we're going to do a quick read. So if we go to the next slide, there is a quick read we're going to do of these 4 practices. So after reading, what you're going to do is you will fill in each row of this chart. You'll see you're going to get a note catcher, your own copy. And you're going to fill in the chart with at least one example of evidence you might anticipate to see in a classroom for each of these teacher practices. So remember, these are teacher moves, not what our students are doing, but what would we as teachers be doing to help our students engage in the science learning. So you will see in our chat that we have both the read and the note catcher. So you're going to get about 5 minutes to do that. And then we're going to come back and share some of our thinking. So go ahead. All right. So what we're going to do now is you will be placed in breakout rooms so that you can share your thinking and your thoughts about some of these ASTPs. You'll get a couple of minutes, and from there, we'll come back and then continue talking about ambitious science teaching practices.
I put 4 minutes.
And none of these people are ambassadors, as far as you could tell, right? Or at least people who came to ambassador.
I don't think they are.
Okay.
I don't remember. I have to look at the list.
Well, ambassadors were told they didn't need to come to this because it's the same. So hopefully they didn't come. Although Miss Arias has seen this intro.
Mm-hmm.
How come she keeps coming? Oh, we're still recording.
Well, it's wonderful that she keeps coming.
No, it's
Evian.
she's giving up her Saturdays. Why does she keep giving up her Saturdays?
Yeah, she's dedicated.
Yeah.
Welcome back. I know that was a short period of time, but
very short.
We'll have more time to discuss and debrief throughout. But let's take this opportunity right now to share out. Are there any of these key practices that particularly stood out to you? And what would be that anticipated example of evidence? So we'll just take a couple of volunteers to share out. You can unmute, type in the chat.
I think I didn't understand that first one. To me, the first one seems self-explanatory. The teacher plans for engagement with important science ideas. Yeah, it didn't. I guess we were struggling what to write because that's just everything science. It was difficult, I guess, to pick something. It seems self-explanatory.
Well, and yeah, it does seem, because we're, as teachers, we have to plan. If you don't plan, what are you going to be teaching? What are you going to be doing? What's the purpose? In science particularly, what might that look like, though, when we talk about planning for science?
Right. So what would you see as an example?
That's something we're going to go into. I'm not sure, should I share? Should I give this answer, or should we delve into it as we go into the videos later?
Maybe we circle back to that.
Yeah, I think we circle back. Thank you. But thank you for that question, Mr. Sandoval. Any other key practices or anticipated examples, or if anybody would like to add on to the question that we were just talking about?
I like the changes in thinking I think it's a very important one, because sometimes you want to move on because time is so important in classroom that sometimes when the kids make a mistake, you immediately want to correct that. So you want to allow kind of like, you're on the process, you'll get there hopefully, but just in the immediate place, like if you feel like their thinking is going in the wrong place, you immediately want to correct it. But sometimes you got to let the kids kind of just keep going, and then hopefully throughout the lessons, then they'll kind of circle back to the correct thing or finally get it. But just time is so precious that a lot of times you don't let them exploring that.
You've definitely nailed it there in terms of just our hopes and desires for our kids when it comes to their learning, and also just the realistic issue of time, right? Time management. But yeah, we want to really support their ongoing changes by giving them that time and the opportunities to make the mistakes and then revise their own learning, right? That self-discovery. Thank you for sharing. We'll go to the next slide. So this is kind of a placemat for these 4 practices. It's just a quick check, quick read. So to come back to that first AST practice, what might planning for engagement look like with important science ideas? We really want to base it and connect it to a phenomenon, right? A real world situation, something that our students can connect to, try to figure out and solve. So it's not just teaching perhaps a topic or a subject, but really within a real world context, something that they can relate to. You see some of those examples above, right? Then we've got eliciting student ideas, supporting their ongoing changes in thinking, and pressing for evidence-based explanations. And you'll see some of these examples of what that might look like for us as teachers when it comes to what we are doing. So to ground us back into this little storyline that we have, and relating it to our ambitious science teaching practices, you'll see that that first quadrant shows the connection here to our anchoring phenomenon. We really want to have our students understand what's going on in the world and connect it to what's happening to them. And what better way than to connect it to something that they want to figure out and solve, right? That's how we're going to plan for engagement with our big science ideas, not just give a topic and not just teach to a certain subject, but really base it on that. In our next slide, you'll see that then we're talking about eliciting students' ideas. So their initial thinking, what might they initially think about this phenomenon? How might they answer this question of what's happening in the world? What might their explanation or their model look like? And at this point, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay for them not to know the answer. Really, it's like you were saying, Mr. Sandoval, that growth over time. How are they going to learn throughout the process? Then, as we look at the following lessons throughout the unit, you will see the opportunities for all 4 of these practices to be happening. So they will be happening together. So in order for our students to really be learning what's happening, revising their thinking, supporting their changes, and pressing for evidence-based explanations, it's going to happen throughout each of these lessons that build on each other. You're going to give them that opportunity in between to revise, right? And then eventually get to that final model or explanation. Each of these lessons are helping our students to build on what they've learned, to understand at a deeper level, and then connect back to answering that anchoring phenomenon. So always pressing for evidence-based explanations. And all of this cannot happen unless we've been planning for that engagement throughout the whole entire process.
Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
No. I was going to go to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah. So just to jump in, so then you'll see the difference between your current curriculum and the old curriculum, that the new curriculum is centered. It's based on phenomena. So it's the whole unit is going through a storyline, right? That's a big difference between what you're doing now and what we used to do with our old curriculum. Instead of just having, the old curriculum may have had engaging lessons, but now we're talking about how do those connect to help develop a storyline. And that's really what the first practice is about, that storyline.
Thank you. The whole basis of our ambitious science teaching is really on equity, right? The central role of equity in AST. So if you can read this quote to yourselves. So what's missing, right? That's the big question. It's not just providing all students with a similar opportunity, right? But we really want to engage them in providing the means by which all of our groups of students can take advantage of situations that are designed to support learning. So you see in the top right corner, the difference between what you might see as equality versus equity, right? It's not all the same teaching and learning. There are some who are going to need a little more or a little less. And that's really what we want to do to make sure that our students are learning. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So coming back to student voice, really understanding how equity is so essential. Ambitious science teaching intentionally supports our equitable instruction by situating learning in familiar context, that what we're talking about with those anchoring phenomenon, being responsive to students' ideas, experiences, and questions. We're going to be eliciting their thinking, right? We're going to be engaging them by asking and listening. Demonstrating and encouraging disciplinary conversations. So even in the discourse, how are we supporting that language? Honoring their students' sense-making repertoires and frequently providing opportunities to show understanding. Every lesson is a chance for our students to add on, to revise, to discuss, to argue, right? It's okay if they don't agree. So here we come to our first little purple slide. We're going to give you some time in breakout rooms to discuss what are some key points we want to make sure to highlight with this activity. Now you are the leaders, and when you take this to your teachers, what are some things you want to highlight in this first section? Another question to consider is, what are some logistical or planning issues to consider as you facilitate this activity, or other protocols you might use and why? And what are some possible teacher responses or potential challenges to consider as you plan for this? So we're going to place you in breakout rooms. The questions are in the chat, and we're going to give you some time to discuss.
Thank you for the prompt, Yin.
The things that you talked about in your rooms, what are some key points or logistical issues, possible teacher responses? Remember, as you are presenting this to your teachers, to your staff, what are some things that you might need to do to help this be more accessible to your teachers?
Jennifer, can I ask you to highlight the connection you made? It was so important.
I'm like, about the phenomenon, you mean?
Yeah, how, we have resources that are kind of ready-made.
Right. I just feel like, amplify is just, it's made, with the phenomenon, and following it throughout the unit and growing and revising their thinking about it and everything throughout the unit. So that part of it has already been, like, we don't have to go searching for that. It's already built into the units, and that's very helpful.
Thank you for sharing. And it's one thing to hear it from us, but another thing to hear it from a teacher who's really in there doing the teaching and learning and in your own classroom. So we can preach to the choir, but really you guys are the ones who are practicing these teacher moves. And so we want you to really see, how well the science teaching and learning can happen, and how it's kind of organized in a way that really is conducive to our students' learning. Thank you for sharing. So I am going to now pass it on back to In-Young.
All right, it's time to look at some really cute videos of little kids. So we're going to look at a second grade class engaging in a phenomenon unit. And you're going to be revisiting that, noticing and wondering from earlier of the flood that happened in Moncton. So as we look at this video in little segments, we're going to and challenge you to look for which AST practice seems most evident and how you know. Let's get started. Here are the dimensions that we're looking at for NGSS. First being the disciplinary core ideas, processes that shape the earth. So this is very different, starting with a phenomenon, saying, what do you think happened here in the town of Moncton? Versus, boys and girls, we're going to start a unit on erosion. It just feels different, doesn't it? So the phenomenon here is what caused the town of Moncton to flood? And you will see students engaging in all three of those SCPs that are LDE's focus, SCPs 2, 6, and 7. And let's start with the first segment.
So we've been investigating the town of Moncton, and we've been wondering and investigating the question, what caused the town of Moncton to flood?
The soil was faster, so the water could go through the glacier moraine to the town of Moncton.
So I heard there's a claim, and I heard some evidence. Can I have someone repeat what you heard? What was the general claim that you heard?
What you see in the video today is young kids weighing multiple hypotheses, checking each other, doing some fact checks, and trying to get to the heart of what part of my statement do you agree or disagree with.
The project that we are working on is really thinking about what certain scientific practices that are central to NGSS look like when working in primary classrooms, so in grades kindergarten through second grade.
What claim did you hear?
I heard that if the glacier had mostly sand and some pebbles in the mountain, then the water would go slower.
Then the water would go slower. Do you agree or disagree?
Agree.
Can you tell me more?
Because when we did the experiment with earth materials and we used sand, it went slower than soil, like pebbles. I kind of want to add on. Yeah, I want to add on to Jamie's. I agree with it is very compact and it has little tiny spaces in between for the water to go through. But I really think that sand went the slowest because sand has the most littlest things in it.
This video looks at a whole unit of instruction and how teachers can support scientific argumentation inside of modeling at the beginning, middle, and end of a unit.
All right. So to lay the groundwork, we're going to identify this first segment as evidence for planning. The teacher planned for students' engagement with important science ideas by introducing this anchoring phenomenon of the town of Moncton. By the way, this is a class in the state of Washington. So anytime we can localize a phenomenon, even better, right? These students live in the space that they're talking about. So what did you see the teacher do to plan for engagement with the phenomenon? Please feel free to share in the chat or unmute. What was evidence you saw of teacher planning for engagement? This was shared earlier, but before this segment, Berenice Delgadillo shared something in the chat, and I feel like it almost mirrors what we could be talking about right now. Thank you for that contribution, Berenice. Some offerings in the chat. Students were writing what they were discussing. They were charting prior learning. They were talking about agreeing and disagreeing. Wonderful. Students knew the talk moves. Yeah, there's evidence that this is something that they're building as routines, right? Thank you. All right, so let's get into the further into the unit. What does instruction look like?
With drawing our initial models and talking about our own ideas and personal experiences about what we think caused the town to flood. At the beginning of the unit, the students are presented with the phenomena and they're given a model to be thinking about how and why the town had flooded. And so as a teacher, I'm listening to students' ideas, listening to their own language that they're bringing.
His idea was that water was going through the ground, and then there was like a layer of stone over here, and then the water kept on rising up. Our model is that maybe the dam exploded because there's such a powerful water current.
Their initial models don't necessarily have a lot of writing, so it's important that you're listening to the students' ideas. Yesterday, you shared your initial ideas of what you think might be happening that's causing the flood for the town of Moncton. And so I have 3 claims that I want to share with you, and I want you to think about them to yourself on whether you agree or whether you would like to make any changes or if you like them just the way they are. So one of the claims we have is, it says, we claim that the water filled up behind the dam and went up the hill and then down to the town. And so I have made copies of the models that showed that idea. Once I had seen those patterns, we presented the claims and asked students to see if they agreed or disagreed with those claims, if they wanted to make any revisions, and had their models where we felt it represented those claims. So she was saying this model should be over here.
Yeah.
Are you agreeing with that? So this model was in the wrong section.
I think there are a few considerations that are important in selecting key claims at the beginning of a unit. That's to anchor modeling and really explaining a phenomenon. The first step that Kitten engaged in was really looking at the range of student models when they first initially thought about what caused the town of Moncton to flood. And so she was trying to select out what are some of the ideas she's seen across models that were common, that were familiar to students, and that also represented a range of perspectives that they'd be able to pursue together over time. Kids come in with a range of really productive and sensible ideas and experiences from their lives. Even young students are coming in with a wealth of experiences, and those are what are particularly generative for supporting their sense-making.
Share your idea again, and I want everyone to think about where does this idea go, this personal experience. So hold on, put your hands down, and let's share that story one more time.
So me and Andrew were using those tools, and we pushed the water off the concrete, and so then it soaked inside the soil.
So this is an idea that would agree and support this claim. Okay, we might have some that you would disagree and have some kind of experience that would say that can't happen.
So in this segment, which ambitious science teaching practice was most evident? And how do you know? You might feel that there's evidence of more than one, but look for which one you think was most evident. We have an offering in the chat already. Let's see if others agree or disagree. So we have a couple thoughts here. Some are identifying 4, pressing for evidence-based explanations. It seems like we have offerings for 2, 3, and 4, right? And the truth is that, yes, you can often see all of these coming into play and working together. For the sake of where we are in the unit, we're going to propose that we focus on the second practice, because this is at the beginning of a unit and the teacher is asking for students' initial models of that town flooding. She isn't yet asking for them to support their initial claims with evidence yet, but she is asking them to look at their own models and see if they agree with where those models fall in terms of initial claims that she's offering the class to consider. So the students are definitely looking for support or evidence in what they were thinking, but they're really at the beginning stages of thinking about what caused the town to flood at all, right? So they're studying each other's initial claims. Let's go to the third video.
So we use the claim T-charts to collect evidence and thinking about the evidence that we are using, whether it proves or disproves that claim. Then as students built their knowledge, they started using other pieces of evidence in the experiments that they've done, the videos that we were watching, the texts that we were reading. And so building that over time, students became more confident in their science ideas. Some students changed their science ideas because of those experiences.
We're going to be shopping for evidence today, and you're going to be thinking about these two claims on whether they help support or disprove these ideas.
They make claims at the beginning of a unit, and then they constantly revise them over time. And they're amounting evidence and weighing evidence throughout the entire unit. But it's all done within the drawing of a scientific model. And they're constantly revisiting and drawing what they can see and what they can't see.
All right. So for this third segment, think about which practice was most evident by recalling what words you heard often. What were some words or phrases that came up a lot?
Changing their thinking.
Changing their thinking. Thinking, Sarias. Revisiting, revising. We have a couple of people recognizing that word revising in there. Thank you, Annie, Berenice, and Jennifer. Yeah, so the teacher was really emphasizing that students get to revise their ideas, revisit them, right? And this is the heart of the third practice, that all throughout students are engaging in these sense-making activities as a way to start constructing their knowledge so that they can go back to their initial models and revise them, right? Wonderful, thank you. Let's go to the next segment. There we go, third practice.
Tell me your claim again.
If the glacier left mostly sand and some rocks in the mountain, then the water would go slower to the town because sand collects the water when the water passes by.
Do you agree with that? So the next step is I want you to be thinking about evidence. We've been talking about evidence. And so how do we know that? So I know this because what I'm hearing you say is that because they're so close together, that it's slowing it down so making it go slower. Is there an example where we saw that because it wasn't so close together that it went faster? Was there a different material that?
Well, I think it was with the pebbles.
So we can look to see too, right? Is there? So was that
The pebble. Well,
so the
clay was 100.
Did that take longer or shorter amount of time?
Long.
Yeah.
They're usually modeling and argumentation together. And And in that way, these practices co-develop, where they get better at scientific modeling and drawing what they can see and what they can't see, along with developing much richer scientific claims over time.
All right, so for this last segment, the teacher was pressing for evidence-based explanations. How do we know this? What did you see the teacher doing?
Questioning the students for their evidence.
She was guiding the students through finding evidence, yes.
She was having them to refer to previous experiments and models that they had worked on.
Yes, and did you notice the chart that she had as a reference for all the students, right? Where they were summarizing activities that they had done throughout that unit. Thank you, Mrs. Spino. And of course, we also have an offering in the chat that there were certain talk moves that she had. She asked them, how do you know? She framed them, or she gave frames for them, sentence starters like, I know this because. There was a lot of using modeling and argumentation together so that students could show their evidence for how they knew. So we have one final segment for you, and this is a conclusion of the unit.
We do a lot of thinking about how scientists is not just usually one person, and that is a group of people working together as a community. And so we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year talking about what does that look like and what does that sound like. It's not quick at all. Yeah, it takes time. So what are you hearing Jamie
I
saying?
heard Jamie say that he thought that the sand was going to, I actually can't remember now.
So what can you do?
Can you please repeat it, Jamie? I agree with Nick's idea because the sand is more packed together than the pebbles. There aren't as many holes in the sand. Yeah. And I agree with that idea.
I feel like they've changed in having the confidence of being able to share their thinking and agreeing and disagreeing comfortably. I see them now challenging each other and thinking about the ideas that they share and asking really good questions or clarifying what do they mean by that. I want to thank you for sharing and taking a stand today, and we'll continue thinking more, yes, and we'll continue thinking more about what's causing this. So nice job today. Thank you.
So in this final segment, it kind of builds on what Annie put in the chat prior, that these discourse moves that the teacher is using, it really highlights the importance of making sure we integrate science and literacy, right? So when you integrate discourse as a regular practice in other content area instruction, we're really giving our students not only a chance to work on literacy skills, but to build that community where they can work on problems together. So, one of the best ways that we found for buy-in from elementary teachers to work on integrating science instruction is to point out these opportunities for speaking, listening, reading, writing, all of those things that build language. So we want to thank you for engaging with us in that segment. One question for you to consider as you wrap up this video: how was student voice amplified in these learning experiences? So we began this segment thinking, what does student voice look like, sound like, and feel like in science learning? And now we can close with this reflection. How was student voice amplified in what we just saw? Students had to make their own claims. They got to revise their own ideas. Students were encouraged to talk about their ideas without being told they were right or wrong. It's tempting, isn't it, to try to redirect our students early on? All right, thank you for your reflection on that. Acknowledging the thoughts of other students. I love how the teacher highlighted students' personal experiences as resources for making their ideas and claims, right? Okay, so we are back now to that purple slide. And the purpose of this is to think of that, this segment we just engaged in, the watching of the video of the second grade class, and think, when it's our turn to facilitate this to our colleagues, how do I plan to do this? I'm anticipating how my colleagues will receive this video, how they will engage in those opportunities for discussion and identifying the practices. How am I going to facilitate that? So we have those questions for you in the chat again, and we're going to invite you to a quick breakout session where you can discuss how you plan to facilitate this. And hang in there, because after that, we'll be shortly having our 5-minute break. So we invite you to return to your breakout rooms and reflect on how you'll facilitate this segment.
Diane, which room were you in? Do you remember? Do you remember who you were with?
Sorry, I didn't know I was on mute.
Oh,
Berenice?
I think you were.
I was with Berenice. I don't know her last name.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's room 1. Okay.
Delgadillo.
Yes. All right. There you go. Annie, do you remember who you were with?
Yes, I was in room 2.
Okay. Thank you. And Sarah, do you remember who you were
Yes,
with?
I was in 3.
3. Thank you. And Ladette, do you remember which room you were in?
I was with Lee. I don't remember what room.
Okay.
With Lee.
Okay. Gotcha.
How are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Good. Let's see. Okay, I got you. It's room 2. Here you go.
Load many different things because they don't have that prior knowledge and those experiences, especially the little ones. They've been, enclosed. So I found myself putting in more videos and, giving more pictures and allowing them to see. It's like, okay, yeah, like you said, this is what snow looks like, guys. Because they don't have those experiences. It's kind of hard, but yeah, I guess we have to be conscientious of the fact that they had school closures and they've been at home all this time. But thank you. I just wanted to get your input on that because I feel like I do have to front load so much.
Mm-hmm. So, Craig, pretty much we were discussing how some kids might come without that prior knowledge and making that personal connection. So we're discussing on other ways to, I guess, get them to engage. For example, maybe a movie they've seen with that type of phenomena or something they've read and have them share that way and jump in.
Students come with a wealth of experiences, huge wealth of experiences, and they're different, right? Different kids come in with different experiences. Different communities of students have different experiences, and tapping into those, using those as funds of knowledge is part of that vision of where we're trying to go here. How do we tap into the wealth of knowledge that students actually do come in with?
So just a quick reflection before we hop for our 5-minute break. What are you considering as you think about facilitating this segment on the video, introducing the ASTPs to your colleagues?
We were just talking about how we thought it would be valuable for the teachers to actually see the literacy skills in action for themselves on the videos, and seeing the kids listening and speaking and writing and doing all those literacy skills to see how, you know, they can be integrated through science in the classroom.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, in our group, Annie was also mentioning this is in math as well, right? We have talk moves all over the place. So we want our kids talking about what they're learning. Thank you so much. All right, folks, we have a break. So let's take the next 5 minutes to refuel, and we'll see you back very soon.
The second one. So we just finished the first block of a PD that you can give with your school, and then now we're going to move into the second one. And the second one is called Eliciting Student Ideas, which is ASTP number 2. Oops, there we go. So let's get started with this one. So the objectives for this one is that that engaged participants will learn to make instructional decisions by eliciting all students' thinking and understanding about scientific ideas, and facilitate making a public record of students' thinking and ideas. So we're going to start off then with a noticing and a wondering. So we're gonna play this little video clip, and we're gonna ask you, what do you notice and what do you wonder about this? We're also going to ask you to think about, can you use scientific reasoning to support an explanation for why this is happening? So we're going to play this here. Okay, so in the chat, then, share some things that you notice and that you wonder from this video. When you're ready, go ahead and press enter. All right, it's magic. It's a very good noticing. Why do the wheels retract from the train? How does it move when the wheels are retracted? how did it continue to move without wheels? Jennifer says, notice, train was able to go over 300 miles an hour. Wonder, how was it able to move without its wheels touching the ground? Bernice, I wonder how it's possible to make it go so fast. How long does it take to reach top speed? Gabriella, how does it move and why does it have that shape? All right, wonderful. So this is the beginning part. This would be like an example of how we might begin with introducing students to something new, some phenomenon. And then we might go into then a modeling piece, which is to get students to put their ideas out there. This is a modeling template here that you see. What it's showing, oops, I haven't pressed next on the slide. Here's a modeling template. And what you see here is it's showing it's asking the students to sort of figure out and label and draw what's happening before, during, and after. The questions that it's asking the students are, why does a train rise? Then why does it float? Then why does it fall? So there's kind of a before, during, and after sequence. And it's asking the students to write down what can they see, and then what they can't see. So what are they trying to, like, why do they think this is happening? And then we're asking the students how and why does the train rise and fall? And this reminds me of, so tapping into things that they're bringing into the class already, tapping into some prior knowledge that they might have. Rather than jump into this template ourselves, what we're going to do is we're going to just spend a couple of minutes with a more simplified version of this. We're just going to give you, just so that you have a little bit of practice with modeling yourself, we're going to have you open up in the participant slide deck that Inyo placed into the chat. In there, you're going to find just this simplified version of the template. It doesn't have the before, during, and after. But here we're going to ask you to spend a couple of minutes and think about and jot down how and why you think the floating train works. And you can use Kami to write on it, or you can open it up in Google Slides and use a scribble. Either way, we're going to ask you to kind of try to scribble on there and draw some pictures about what you think is going on and how you think it's working. And also we're going to ask you just to discuss it in your group as you're doing that. So we're just going to give you a very short time to do this. We're going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to do so. Are there any questions before we send you to the breakout room? We're going to ask you to use pictures, arrows, and words to describe how and why the floating train works. Focusing on things that you can see and trying to guess at the unobservable, the things that you can't see. Any questions before we go to breakout? All right, so we're going to give you about, we're not going to give you enough time, but we're going to give you just a little taste. All right, we'll see you back in a few minutes. So we didn't give you as much time as we wanted to give you, or as we would have given you if we were doing this as a standalone PD. We wanted to give you enough time to actually do some drawing on there and to talk about your drawings of what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. But if you can imagine that you have more time to do so, then what are some things that you might have put on here in terms of drawing, in terms of modeling your thinking?
Someone in my group was able to recall some things that students have modeled here because they recognize the unit.
Yeah, right. In the group that I was in, they were talking about magnets. And so then if a student knew about magnets, then they could have drawn magnets on there if they were thinking that this had something to do with magnets. So in the interest of time, then I'm going to move on to the next one. Next slide here. And this piece that we just did, the intention is to give teachers a chance to do a little bit of modeling, which a lot of teachers haven't had that chance to do. To sit down and draw out what they can see and try to guess at things that they don't see. So in this case, I didn't give you enough time to do that. So we're sort of limited in what you were able to do in that breakout room, and then the discussion that you're able to have with that. Even though you had a good discussion, you were able to talk about it some. We didn't give you enough opportunity to draw it out. So when we do this this is a logistical issue that we're confronted with in this very moment that we're trying to speak to. So hopefully when you present this with your staff, then you'll have enough time in your standalone PD that you'll be able to actually give them the time to do this, because there's value in giving the teachers space to put their thinking on paper and to discuss it as a student would do, and to experience it as a student would experience it. So when you're doing this with your staff, please give them about 8 minutes and ask them to really draw something. If you have in-person meetings, or if you can hand out papers beforehand, you can give them the template in paper form, and then that lowers the barrier of trying to open up Kami or trying to open up Google Slides or something like that, and gives them that opportunity to just draw on paper more quickly and easily. Any thoughts about this particular piece before we move on to the next part of this? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next part then.
So the purpose in doing that modeling, as Craig said, was to really give us a chance, you as teachers, a chance to engage in the learning the way that our students might be engaging. And yes, it is coming from one of our third grade units, so you may or may not have recognized it. But the idea is that we really want our students to be understanding that their thinking can and will change over time. So as we teach science, we want to support that thinking, support that change that's happening. And if you click one more time, you'll see that the slide shows, we have that initial model. So this was a chance for our students to show that initial thinking. What might their explanations be on how this is working, what's happening, and then elicit that at the beginning so that over the course of time, we can see how it changes and might revise. So now we're going into that second ambitious science teaching practice of eliciting students' ideas. In the beginning, they're going to have these initial ideas that are partial. And what we want to do is we want to help our students to engage in their thinking and learning by selecting ideas to make public and then adapting our instruction further. What can we do next to help them? So our students will have varying degrees of understanding, right? So their models, those initial models may show different degrees of what they know, what prior knowledge they might have. So there might be students who are showing at a level of just what is happening, right? It's a description of what's happening, what they think might be occurring. So you see initial thinking is maybe there are magnets involved. Then you have students who might be able to explain, well, how the phenomenon is happening. How is it? There's a little more detail in giving those explanations, whether through drawings or in words. And then students who might have further details in terms of explaining why that phenomenon is happening. So what are the processes or relations in play, and why do they fundamentally work the way that they do? And so these models really just give us a conceptual understanding of what our students might know. So when we elicit students' initial ideas about that anchoring phenomenon, we want to facilitate conversations with students in 3 phases. So again, there's that initial what, introducing that puzzling event, eliciting just their observations. What did you see and what did you hear? But then we also want to move them on further into really explaining how that might be happening, what might be going on. And this can happen in small groups, as a whole group, and really get them to give more details, right? What conditions might have led up to this? And then finally into the why, pressing for the deeper possible causal explanations. What's going on that we may not be able to necessarily see? If you can't observe it, it's harder to explain. And students need to be able to explain these unseen events and processes. And that's really showing a deeper understanding. So they might have a partial understanding, they might have alternative conceptions, and be able to use everyday language or experiences, add on through previously taught science ideas or their own self-generated analogies. So one way to really elicit that student thinking is to conduct a gallery walk. What are their initial models? And let students see what their classmates are thinking. So they might walk around to talk about what they see, and you can give them the task of commenting using Post-its, right? So if there's a new idea that they didn't think about, that could be a red Post-it, or an idea that's the same or similar to theirs would be a green Post-it. And you'll kind of see some of the possible hypotheses grouped. Some of these students might be thinking about air pressure. Some students might think there's a rocket involved, fire. And then other students might think there are magnets involved. And you'll be able to see through these Post-its, what are my students really understanding, and how are they engaging? So as you do that gallery walk, it helps us as teachers to also kind of select the ideas that we want to make public. So in our next slide, you'll see that you can have your students just work together in small groups to create a model. You can have them we can work together as a whole class. Like, what's the consensus on what this model might be showing us initially? Or make a whole class list of the multiple hypotheses that were seen through this gallery walk. And it's just a way to make their ideas public, allow students to see what the thinking is, agree, disagree, really see how can I be adding on to or revising my thinking. So as they do that gallery walk, you saw that there will be possible hypotheses. And this really helps us as teachers to understand, what do my students know? What preconceptions, misconceptions, what things can I use to add on to? So some students are going to say possibly air or rockets or magnets. Now, from these 3 hypotheses, not choosing one to focus on or to say is correct, but really having them all be visible to our students so that they can all make these thinking decisions on their own as they're engaging in the learning. That kind of takes us to our next step as teachers, is how do we then adapt for further instruction? So taking these initial models, leveraging their current thinking for what's coming up next, looking at resources from whether it be their partial understandings, their language, everyday experiences, and then grouping them. You saw in that Mockton series that the teacher took their initial models and kind of grouped them into different possible hypotheses, and the students then started to work out, well, these might go together, these might not, and they were able to build onto that. So being able to cluster these hypotheses, ask the students to take a claim, explain, give their reasoning, their justification for their thinking, that's really a huge step in just allowing student voice to grow as well. So you may or may not be familiar with this, but for every domain, you'll see that there is a progression across grade levels from the primary K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. And so what we're going to ask you to do is look at the element in your grade span for this floating train phenomenon. We're all elementary here, so you might be looking at K2 or 3 to 5. Each of these bullet points represents a different element within the physical science progression, physical science DCI. And so what we're asking you to think about are, what are some possible partial understandings your students might have? How would you know that? And what would you do next, right? We're talking about these teacher moves that we would be planning, engaging, eliciting. What are we going to do as teachers? So take a look at the elements and think about what partial understanding students might have. And when you're ready, go ahead and unmute or stick your thoughts in the chat. Perhaps there are teachers who, I know there are teachers who have done or do recognize the possible element that you may find in our science curriculum. And maybe you have experience with some of the partial understandings your students might have. We would love to hear. So I see Mr. Sandoval says, the bigger the magnet, the stronger the push or pull. That could be a thought, a partial understanding your students might have. Yeah, they might have an understanding about magnets, and that the bigger it is, the stronger it might be, okay? So I'm seeing a connection to magnets in our second bullet point for elementary school, grades 3, 5. So we know that magnets don't necessarily require objects to be in contact. The sizes of the forces in each situation depend on the properties of the objects and their distances apart. That magnets, we have Ms. Sandoval mentioning that magnets attract or repel, that they might repel from each other. They're not going to, they'll do one or the other, I'm sorry. Okay, and then previous understandings about if you flip a magnet, why does it not float above the earth? We're going into a different, another layer, right? About Earth's surface and the pole that we know about with magnetism. Thank you for sharing.
Right, a lot of students think that magnets only pull towards each other.
So that's a partial understanding for our students, right, to build on. And you'll see that even though we're in the elementary grades here, middle school and high school, this is a phenomenon that really is very, very high level thinking, right? So to be able to understand how the magnetic forces work, how they attract or repel, these are things that happen across the grade levels. So it's not just something that you might see in our third grade curriculum, but something you could use in middle school or high school. Thank you for sharing. So our next slide is another facilitation slide. Some of the key points that you want to make sure with your staff as you highlight this activity: some logistical issues, planning issues to consider, alternate protocols, and what are some possible teacher responses or challenges as you present this to your staff. We're going to give you, again, just a couple of minutes, 2 minutes in breakout rooms. So it'll be a quick chat, and see you back soon.
Breakout rooms are funny today. They're not remembering where people go. Let's see, Melissa, you were in room 1. Ladette, you were in 2, is that right? Okay, where were you again?
I was in 2.
2, thank you. Sarah, where were you again?
3.
3, thank you. And Luis, where were you again?
I have no idea.
Oh, do you remember who
I
you
don't
were
know
with?
what number it was. No.
Oh, okay. You were with Sarah?
You can throw me anywhere. It's all good.
Okay. All right. I think you were with Sarah.
So we know that was not nearly enough time, but to move on, just some key points or planning issues, possible teacher responses that you think may come up as you share this with your staff.
It's always time. Time's always a factor that everyone mentions. We don't have enough time for language arts and math, and then we're going to, add a lot more into it. So time is always a frequent.
Time is,
Yeah, a frequent concern.
not only for our students, but even for us as we're presenting, right? How are we going to engage the participants deeply without having to take anything away? So that's definitely a logistical issue. Thank you for sharing.
There's a time question, and there's a time question with PD time and giving PD space for science. And then there's also the time question of teaching science, right? And Veronice was talking about in our group earlier how this train can be, you can use an input-output table and like integrating in with like math, thinking through some math tools and practices in the science as well. So thinking of ways to integrate, right, is going to be leveraging that integration with the science, science and ELA and science and math are going to be a way that can help people save time. So keeping that in mind as you go, where are these opportunities, as Inyang was talking about earlier, for the speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So thank you all for bringing that up.
One of the things that was brought up in our group also was not only the time followed for teachers to plan, but to go over the materials.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So just another quick note, the more if you're mindful, if teachers are mindful about how they're bringing in the reading and the writing into the science work that they do, then they can pull back on the benchmark. They don't have to do every single thing in benchmark if it's being integrated. If we're all about standards, so how are the standards being covered? So if the standards are being covered in one area, you don't have to double it in the other area if the students have mastered it. So as we're rounding out here, we want to share with you this template. Inyang has placed a copy of this template into the chat, and this template it's 2 pages. The first page, this is a little tool for us to use. This is a discourse tool about planning what you're going to say and thinking through when you're going to teach science, what are these opportunities to really get in and elicit student ideas. So as you can see here, there are steps. So step 1 is introducing the puzzling event and eliciting observations as a whole class. There are some generic questions here to pose to the students, and there's a space for teachers to write specific questions based on the science lesson that they're about to engage in. So taking the generic questions and redesigning them into something specific will be helpful for the teacher. This is a place where this is a tool that you can give to the teachers to plan on their next steps here. This would be a space to plan for next steps in science teaching. Then the next column is about when the teacher asks these questions, then what are they going to listen for? What are some things that they can listen for from the students? And then a space for the teacher to reflect. Okay, so I said these things, I elicited these student ideas, I heard these responses, and now what do I do? Okay, how can I encourage the continuing of the eliciting of student ideas, and where can I go from here? What discourse strategies did I use to help with that? So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is then once we've introduced a puzzling idea and gotten observations, we start with the observation. What did you see? Then we get into what do they think is going on? These are the hypotheses. So I think that this is happening, right? So that these are questions teachers can pose, the general questions. Here's a place for teachers to write in what they're actually going to say in those opportunities, and so on. Step number 3, pressing for possible explanations. So here are some general questions again. Teachers have a space to plan for that. And then summarizing and selecting ideas from the ideas to make public. So here are some general questions for that. And then teachers have a space to write in their own. And then step number 5 would be then, what is the adaptation for further instruction? So this is the front side of the template. If we had enough time, we would give you time to actually dive in. Like if we were giving this at your school, we would give time for teachers to actually dive into whatever's coming up. We would invite them to open up their curriculum and say, now we're going to give you a few minutes to work on this planning template, because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road here. And then the second page is then after they teach, then it's an opportunity for teachers to reflect on what are the partial understandings that my students have. How many students are understanding these things? What are the alternative understandings? What everyday language are the students using that I can leverage to get into the academic vocabulary? A lot of times they're using their own language. How can I leverage that? And then what experiences have the students had that we can leverage into here as well? So this is a nice little planning template that teachers can use, a planning and reflection template. So as we're closing out today, we're going to ask you to share what was the most valuable thing that you learned, or that you think what's the most valuable thing for you as a learner from today? And which part of today's PD do you think have the highest leverage pieces? And what will be your next steps to implementing those? We'll just take a minute to share out. We'll just share out verbally.
For me, the videos of the science videos, watching the teachers teach it and model it with the claims and hypotheses were helpful. The most helpful. Everything was good.
Videos are powerful, powerful. Thank you. Making student ideas public, Jennifer says. Melissa says, facilitating authentic student voice. Thank you. We apologize that we didn't run through this with enough time to spend a few minutes on this at the end where we could really come together. But thank you for sharing these ideas, and thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciate you as leaders taking your time to be here with us today, to think about your practice as a teacher and how you're going to help lead at your school to take the really good things that are happening at your school and then take it to the next level. In the chat, In Young has placed a sign out, as well as the links for deck number 1 and deck number 2. Please take a minute to sign out and then also to provide your feedback in the evaluation. Once again, thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate all that you're doing. Have a wonderful rest of the day and the weekend too. Well-deserved weekend. Please feel free to stay on if you have any questions. Otherwise, thanks for being here today.